Sad Guest, the latest work from renowned German author Matthias Nawrat must grapple with just this eternal question. With encounters with an existential architect, a struggling alcoholic ex-doctor, and other recollections of his travels, this narrator encourages us to explore the space of possibility between loss of homeland, euphoria of departure, and ceaseless longing. In conversation with poet Jonaki Ray, Matthias Nawrat discusses his portrait of the conflicts of the modern condition and guides us through the influences and intricacies within his earlier novel. Jonaki Ray published writer for his 2012 debut novel. He received the Adalbert von Chamizo Fort Prix, among others. His 2014 novel, The Enterprise, was nominated for the German Book Prize and won the Kielak Prize and the Bern 2 Wordplay Prize. His following novel, The Many Deaths of Grandfather Urek, won him the Bremen Literature Prize and the Alfred Doblin Medal. Nawrat's fourth novel, The Sad Guest, was published in 2019. In 2020, he was awarded the European Union Prize for Literature. Jonaki Ray was educated in India and the United States and is now a poet, writer, and editor based in New Delhi. Honors for her work include the Iceland Writers Retreat Alumni Award in 2019 and the Pushcart Prize. Jonaki's work has been widely published in numerous journals, newspapers, and anthologies. Her poems are forthcoming and have been published by the Poetry Foundation and Sahitya Academy and elsewhere. You all remember all our sessions are available to view on our Facebook page, JLF LitFest, and on our YouTube channel, Jaipur LitFest JLF. Please do remember to ask questions and comment by typing it into the comment section below, and Jonaki will ask these of our speaker at the end of the session. In case any of you drop off due to bandwidth issues, you can find us on our YouTube channel, Jaipur LitFest JLF. And in case we drop off, just hang in there and we'll be right back. Ladies and gentlemen, the sad guest, Matthias Nawrat, in conversation with Jonaki Ray. Jonaki, Matthias, over to you.
Thanks a lot, Sanjay, for that wonderful introduction. Hi, Matthias.
Hi. Thank you very much.
I hope you're not. I'm good. I hope you're not a sad guest today.
No. I'm very, very happy to join you, and I'm very, very happy about this invitation, and I'm really thrilled, and I'm looking very forward to our conversation.
Thank
you.
Good
to meet you.
Yeah, same here. Actually, I read an excerpt. I was lucky enough to read an excerpt of your novel, and I found it very interesting because I think, especially in these times, it talks about home and departure. But before I get into details about the book, like all good storytellers, let's start at the beginning. Could you tell a bit about your journey and what does the concept of home, a homeland, mean to you? Because then we will move to the novel.
Mm-hmm. Well, when I'm thinking about home, it's always it has always like two dimensions for me. There's one very obvious dimension. For example, in my personal life, there was. We left our home in Poland. I'm from Poland, actually. And when I was 10, my parents moved to Germany. And this was in a time when there still was the border between East and West in Europe. So it was kind of a loss of a home for a long time. And we did not know if we could ever go back and meet our grandparents and our family. So this is... Yeah. On the one hand, it's like this very simple, it was this very simple geographical translocation. But on the other hand, even people who do not, who stay in the village they come from or in the city they come from, there's always this question: what is home in a more metaphysical way? Like, what makes us feel at home, really, not only in terms of geography or even culture, but also how do we feel? Do we safe in existence itself? And this is especially relevant for people who lose family members, who lose their home in a way that means, who really encounter death and who know what it means to lose everything. People you love and who have to abandon the place they are connected with in a deeper way. They know people there, had their lives there, like, for example, 20, 30 years, experiences, stories they can tell about it. So I would say it's something between, home in a geographic way and home in a metaphysical way, not even in a religious way. Of course, religion and metaphysics is interconnected, but in a way, in terms of really family and the loved ones and the place you feel that you're deeply connected with. I hope this.
Sorry.
I hope I could answer your question. I tend to lose my, my red line, and so. But
no, I got that sense as well that like I said, especially during this lockdown and coronavirus, all of us, and I as a writer also, have been thinking, what is home? So I really connected to the excerpt that I read of your piece. And before I ask you to read a bit, I wanted to mention and ask you to comment about the style, because the bit I read, it seemed like a journal, a diary. So is this the style of your other books, or is this the style you followed for this one? So could you explain your thinking behind it?
Yes, this is a very recent. This was actually a very recent evolution of my writing style, because the 3 other books I wrote till then, they were much more experimental about language, and they already dealt with similar topics, but I was much more interested in how to play with language. What is language able to tell beyond only telling the facts? And but with this book especially, I started writing it in a time when Europe really changed, when this illusion of the end of history in Europe, right after the fall of the wall and so on, when this illusion started to a little bit to shake, and this was during the Ukrainian war, and then shortly after that. There was this Europeans realized that there are many people who are trying to come to Europe and they are not allowed to, like these refugees from Africa and from Syria, for example. And this is, of course, something which happened all the time before. It has been happening like for years or decades, but this was the moment when everybody realized, whoa, what is going on? And in this period of time, I have to say, it was also for me, it was very eye-opening, and I sensed that I cannot write longer the way I did, and I need to find a language which is which can somehow grab, I think is the name, or show more of what is happening nowadays and what is going on in the city I lived in. I moved to Berlin back then, and Berlin is a very global city. You meet a lot of people from different parts of the world and people with real problems, which I'm very privileged, and I come from a family that of course experienced this translocation, this immigration, but this had been 30 years ago, so I kind of feel very privileged. And this was the first time when I realized, no, it's not only, these are not only stories that we see through the media, but this is happening all around me, and this is what our recent history and our present is, and that the world itself is our human home, and we have to somehow deal with it. And so then I started to ask myself, how can I write? And then you're right, because I started really writing a journal, just noting what I saw. People, I started to write about encounters that I had in Berlin, and small ones, bigger ones. And then I realized that this kind of language is able maybe to do what I want, and that I'm able to explore the present with this kind of language. And then I started to domesticate it. I started to, because I realized from this journal kind of language, I immediately slip into fiction again. And then I started to use this kind of writing to write what I wanted to write about. And so this is how it evolved. So you're very right that it actually derives from really from a journal style writing.
It's interesting because I read somewhere that you have been trained as a biologist, I think in university, and I actually was trained as a chemist. And
I wrote that. Yeah, I read that. Yeah.
So I found it very interesting because I feel, and the next question would be for you to read a bit. But before we get into that, I'm sort of raising expectations, I think, here. I feel it's a very interesting style because there is a duality. You, as the narrator, is managing to observe, and there's a little bit of detachment, which I think a scientist's analysis brings, but at the same time there's also a gradual empathy with the people the narrator is observing. So did your background influence your writing? Is that something you feel? Because I find this combination very interesting.
Well, I can remember that when I studied biology and when I was confronted with this kind of, I would say, objectifying language of the sciences, I felt like I have to fight it somehow. I have to find a way to transcend this way of thinking where humans are measurable and they are only numbers, which is the case, for example, for psychological experiments or sociological experiments also. And so I was searching for, I think that's the main reason why I started writing, was to find another language where the individual can be important one, like the thing that is not measurable, the thing that is not object that is not subject to natural laws and stuff like that. So, which is really unique. And so I was experimenting a lot with literary languages and with another way of thinking. And I think this really still is influencing me a lot. So this is always this duality between there is a way of thinking about humans in a more general way, but also the most important thing is actually the one single human and his whole world, his inner world. So this is probably something which still is valid in this book also.
So would you like to read an excerpt and then we can discuss further?
Sure, yeah. How long do you want me to read?
Well, actually, one of the pieces I liked a lot, two pieces. One was the Hadi piece, the hairdresser. So maybe you could read that.
Yeah, maybe I will read this one. Yeah, this is because it's really about present Berlin. The book is it very much connects history of Europe with the presence of the world. So, and this is one piece of very present writing. Okay, so the chapter Al-Hadi. The next morning, I decided to go to the hairdresser. I left my building to find it had snowed, all sounds muffled, a single car inching onto the crossroads. I walked past the two young Turkish men's Salon La Bella and past the Café Polonia and turned onto Grünthaler Straße to Salon Al-Hadi. As I entered the shop beneath a jangling bell, there were two men in the room. One was very fat, obese in fact. He was wearing a gray sweatshirt and Birkenstock sandals and sitting on one of the chairs against the wall, his belly rising like a table in front of him. The other had a delicate build and wore a gray shirt tucked into jeans. Unlike the large man who sported a mustache, his face was clean-shaven. He was sweeping up hair and gestured at one of the two seats in front of the wall-length mirror. When I sat down, the large man, who now suddenly seemed to have been talking before, began speaking again. He spoke fast, with a raised voice. He was holding his telephone in front of his face, and as I leaned back and the slim hairdresser put an apron over my shoulders, the large man used the fingers of his other hand to swipe across the screen, as if commenting on something he had just read. He sat on the very edge of his seat. The hairdresser fastened a strip of crepe paper around my neck, turned back to him and made affirmative noises. Then we had a brief conversation in German about what kind of haircut I wanted. The hairdresser had a quiet, friendly voice. "Do you want a shave as well?" he asked. "No, thanks," I said. In the mirror, I saw the fat man behind me, and above him a muted television showing people sitting at a table being served aesthetically arranged meals and having an animated conversation. While we had been talking about my hair, the fat man had started a telephone call. He laid one calf over the opposite knee and fiddled nervously with his sandal on his foot, enclosing a gray sock. He held the telephone to his ear and went on speaking at the same volume and in the same dramatic tone, but in his face, which I saw in the mirror, I thought I could now make out uncertainty, as if he were talking about something very important, and the fervor of his speech were to do with excessive stress. I suddenly fancied he kept repeating the word Assad, the name of the tyrant from Syria, which was where he might come from himself and part of his family might still be living. But then I thought I probably only thought I was hearing that word, omnipresent as it was in the news. The fat man wasn't speaking particularly clearly. It might just as well be Ahmad or Hassan. The hairdresser, by now cropping my hair at the back, didn't seem to be listening to him any longer. He was immersed in his own thoughts, looking out to the window to where trapezoids of sunlight took shape on the pavement. Then I saw him nodding in the mirror, and I heard him directing an affirming word behind him. He turned around to the fat man, who had put his telephone down but gone on speaking with the same urgency in his voice, which sounded slightly hoarse by now. I wanted to say something. I wanted to ask the large man behind me something, address his situation in some way. But I didn't know what to say, and so I sat there in silence while the hairdresser brushed the clippings off the back of my neck. Soon the hairdresser put the razor aside. My face in the mirror was strange and unfamiliar, like some other person's. I paid €8, said goodbye to them both and smiled at them. They returned my goodbye and smiled back. The fat man simply went on speaking, and I was glad to be outside on the pavement. As I turned back onto our road, I decided I was thinking too much about the matter. Even if what I supposed were true, I couldn't do anything about it. The war in the fat man's country was a fact. Likewise, that I and the two of them lived here. And yet, I still felt ashamed as I walked past the Salon La Bella on our road, not to have asked the two of them anything.
It's beautiful, beautiful.
Thank you so much.
Very interesting because it's almost like a short film where you feel you're right there in the hairdressers, and you're right, it's about the micro, the world inside the narrator's head, and at the same time, the happenings in the world, the fact that these people have come from Syria. So there is a sort of conflict where he feels that he should have asked something, but I feel that that's there in all of us, and especially when we are traveling or when we see someone a little unfamiliar, we feel curious, but we also feel, should we cross that line and actually empathize and ask? The other excerpt, which is a little longer one, but I really liked it, was the architect one, where the narrator goes. Is it, I like the way you balance it, but did the narrator's voice move from this distancing, like in Al-Hadi, to gradually becoming more involved, which is the sense I got from the architect story. So could you comment on how you balance that? Yeah.
This is, there are, in this book, there are two main encounters. The architect, this woman, this lonely woman living in a very small apartment in Berlin, is one of them, and the other one is a doctor who is suffering from alcoholism, and he lost his son, and so, and many times only by in these two cases, by accident, this narrator gets to know them, and they start to tell them their biographies, and he is not really able to say no, and he stays with them, and even if those biographies are really tough and are really depressing, and they really, those two people kind of they kind of cross this distance between, because it's not really sure what are they friends, are they only encounters by accidents. So and this is what the book is about in general. Where is the moment when this distance is broken through and you get to know someone, and you get in touch with his very hurtful story? And so there are two or three, actually. There is another one with a Romanian person he meets, where he is not able to resist his own empathy, and this is what it is about. Because of course we meet a lot of people also when we are traveling, and we see a lot of bad in the world and very hard biographies, but there's always a distance, and but this narrator, and this is what defines him, I would say, because the book is not about his life, it's about his way of looking at the world, and about his way of not going away, staying there and listening to those people and getting involved. And so I would say there are three main acquaintances, or even I would say maybe friendships in the end, and a lot of smaller ones, and it's moving on this edge, and sometimes it's crossing it, sometimes it's staying out of the lives, but it's always this his gaze onto people and his interest in them, and his inability to not get involved. So I would say this is the main thing. And of course, as you said, this is the first time I was reading it in English. So excuse my pronunciation, but but what you were talking about, that this is, these are small encounters. It's very, typical German street and typical Berlin setting. But of course, there is this. The biographies are global, and I was really happy to read some of your poems, which are also very, in a way, very global. There are like many allusions to all over the world places, but still there's always this question: okay, but what is home for those people? What is home for everybody? Not only Germany is my home and I want to stay in Germany, but what is this world? Because this world, one could say, this world is the only home we have as humans. And what do we do with it? We are at present, we are in a stage where we can travel all over the world, and the conflicts in the world have an impact on everybody else. So now we realize, okay, what is happening now is that we need a global empathy. And everybody needs it. And also the Europeans, for example, who tend to forget what happened in the past and how they acted in the past in terms, for example, of colonial history, post-colonial history. And also everybody tends to forget what system you live in and what impact the system you live in has on other parts of the world. And so I guess this is the way literature can, show these little moments of where different kind of people get together, and what happens then. How can we have empathy, and how can we act towards them?
Yeah. So before I forget, thank you for reading my work and for your kind words. And coming back to your novel, I found it very interesting, this idea of empathy, because history is very cyclical, and it's one of the concepts that fascinates me, and that's why I like your work so much. And there is a little line in the story about the architect where the story about the grandmother, I think, is spoken, and how an entire city is relocated. And there's a line that actually, essentially, it's the same. And I think, that is the basic fact. And what I found interesting is, just as the narrator is trying to, in a way, cross the border between the micro, his internal world, and the macro, the world around. Similarly, the world itself is always balancing between these borders. And it's, you're right, it's very easy to sort of get into this I think nationalistic, and there is this divisions, but it's very important to remember the nature, the cyclical nature, and the fundamental commonality, if I can say it, because like the architect's grandmother is always packed to go home, but eventually realizes that home is actually in this new country, and it's as if you're just picked up and shifted home. So what is home? That is, again, the fundamental question where we began. And in a way, your book reminded me of Stefan Zweig. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right.
It's one of my very... I like him very much.
Yeah, so I have not read all of his pieces, but I was reading his compilation of essays called Journeys, where he's picked up, and it's World War II, and Nazism is coming up. And I think many things have changed, but many things have remained the same. So what are the influences? And I think we have a little bit time before audience questions. So what are the influences on your writing in terms of other writers?
Well, for example, Stefan Zweig, who is a really... I'm not in terms maybe of his, or not only of his prose work, but really his essayist work and his way of thinking, because he was kind of he grew up in this old Eastern Austrian Empire, which was it was an empire, but on the other hand, it was already a little bit, very modern, and he was thinking in a global way. And so this is a very strong influence. And then, of course, in terms of writing, I have read a lot of Eastern European writers, and but also American writers. I read a very little German writing. I don't know why. Maybe. I don't know. There are some writers that really inspired me, but not many of them. And I have to say that in terms of writers from all over the world, I'm a little bit uneducated. Like, for example, Indian writers, I only know a few. But one of them, I don't know if you know her. Her name is Rajati Salma. She is from Tamil, from the Tamil part of India. The place is called Chennai, and she writes poems, but also prose. And what I really find inspiring, and there are many emerging authors who do it this way too. That she describes very, very powerfully the status of women in this society. Yeah. And so this is what I'm really happy about, that in Europe, at least since like 20, maybe even only 10 years, there are more and more female voices who I really admire, or for example, in the US also. And so I could go on and on, but I have to say that I'm still, there is not this one influence, because I'm reading all the time, and I'm reading, and every book is influenced by someone else, or by a mixture of other writers. So I
could see as you said, the thought process was similar to Zweig's, but there are a couple of audience questions. One is from Amanda, who asks, the narrator goes to a pub near the Hadi, and he meets this Polish architect. It is almost like you have created a new place, which is both Polish and Berlish. Is that a world of its own? And how did you think of creating this fictional place? Interesting question.
Yeah, well, in Berlin, it's really like, it's reality. There are bars. They are Polish in a way, but also German. The people who work there, for example, they speak both languages. They are derived from Poland or are born in Germany, but they have Polish parents, and this is something. It's not new. The Polish-German connection is very old. Actually, there have always been connections, and for example, also this hairdresser salon, Al Hadi, it's just happening. There are many places in Berlin that are Syrian or Turkish or Chinese or you name it. And you can go inside, and they speak Chinese and German, or Polish and German. And myself, I speak Polish. And also German, of course. And so this is something that is happening. But in terms of writing, I always been experimenting with creating a space between, because I always felt that also the two languages, if you know them, if you know both of them, and this is the same probably with other languages in English, you learn to see that there are different ways of thinking, and combining this is what I was doing, what I have been doing for a long time, and I think it's not possible for me to do it differently, because this is how I work.
Great. So speaking of language, the next question is from Prithvish, who asks, do you think your translated work holds the same essence as the original, or do you believe something has been lost in the process?
In terms of the translation of this specific book, there is only it's only a fragment, or it's a part of the book was translated by Katie Derbyshire, and she really did a great job. And when I read this translation, this English translation, I thought, well, it is really very close. This is not the case for my other books. There is a translation of Unternehmer or entrepreneurs. There is a small fragment translated into English also, in different languages also, but into English. And I felt that it was difficult to translate it because it deals more with, playing around with the German language, which is really hard to translate into other languages. But my last book, The Many Deaths of Grandfather Jurek, which is about the European history of the 20th century, it was translated into Polish. And this was really interesting because, for example, my father said, this translation is even better than the original, than the German one. And when I read it, I really had to say, yes, this is true. And I think this is because I'm thinking in Polish sometimes. And when I'm writing German, it is a new language a little bit. Changes the language somehow when you come from a different language. So it was really interesting to see this, this typical Polish humor and these jokes and stuff like that. So this was funny.
So there's another question. Speaking of conversations, Arijit is asking, it's also really interesting that the narrator always starts some kind of conversation that doesn't necessarily come from him, and you then learn more and more about the person he has met. That's a very interesting perspective. How did you come up with that? That's always an indirect narrative.
Yes, this is a very good question because it's really fundamental for this book. I was searching for a way to tell stories about other people. I did not want to tell, a story about my privileged situation in the world, because I always thought that writing is about, being able to give the stage to others also. And so I was looking for a way of telling stories about other people that will be authentic, because it's really hard to, I could tell a story about a Polish architect who is 70 years old, but it's not me. I mean, it kind of reads a little bit strangely when I use a first person narrator and act like I was this architect. So I was looking for a perspective to make it possible to tell those biographies. And then I found out that I read a book of W.G. Sebald. This is probably one of the German narrators I really love. And he told stories about Jewish immigrants who survived the Holocaust. And he writes this way too. First person narrator meets someone, and then this person starts to tell the story, and then we get more and more into the story of the person who is telling his life, and we forget about the first person narrator. We are just in the middle of the second degree story, and so this is what I was experimenting with.
So we have two more questions. Shivani asks, you came to Germany from Poland when you were 10, and first of all, you had to learn the language. How did you get used to the language? And I'll ask the last question because we don't have much time. Kiara Sharma asks, was it a conscious decision to write in German and not in Polish? So you can answer both of them, I guess.
Yeah, these are very related questions. It was of course, I was a child, so it's not that hard to learn a language. But I found out that I learned it by how you call it? Imitation. So I was just saying what the other kids were saying, and then step by step I learned it, and also by reading. So I remember I was fascinated by the way the German language looked like on a piece of paper, in a book, for example. And then I started to experiment with it. It was like the next logical step, or the next natural step. And I think that's why I started writing, because I was fascinated about what is possible with German language. And I did not understand the half of it, but I still was playing around with it. And so this answers both questions.
Yeah, I think you've done a wonderful job. I especially like this whole diary, and it's an interesting way of getting into stories of others. by observing, and then somehow, as you said, you lose the fact that there is actually an observer and you're in that world, and this bridge between the micro and macro is done very beautifully by you.
So much.
And I think the message that I got from your novel is that, as you said, there's a need for empathy, which we really need in this time. And not too many people talk about it, I think, enough. So it's something which we all need to talk about. And as writers, I think we can spread the message. And how do we access your book in India? Do you know? Would you know about it, or when is it available?
Well, there is this translation, this fragment, which was translated by Katie Derbyshire as in context of this European Union Literature Prize. But there is no publisher yet who is translating it. So if any publisher is listening, please buy the right and translate it into English. And then, well, I hope it will happen, and let's see. But because the European Union is, I think they are right now promoting this book, and so if anybody is interested, I would recommend to write not to the European Union, but to this prize jury.
Okay. Great. I think we are out of time. Thank you so much. The time just flew. And I hope you enjoyed the interview as much as I did, the conversation, the interview.
Very much. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot.
And thanks for listening and for watching to all the people at home.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Jeff.
They were really good questions. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you so much, Jonaki, and thank you so much, Matthias Nawrat. And as you both rightly said, there's such a need for empathy in today's world, especially now that we are all faced with this new reality. And
Yes.
As you said, what is the meaning of home for those people who have no home, and what is the meaning of loss, etc. Matthias, your work seems to be absolutely fascinating. The fact that you're being able to write both in Polish and German, put it together in this wonderful sort of journal format that Jonaki and you talked about. So thank you both so much for being on JLF, A Brave New World. This session was presented in partnership with the delegation of the European Union to India, the European Union Prize for Literature, the Cultural Relations Platform, and Creative Europe. We're really very delighted that these four partners came on board: the delegation of the European Union, the European Union Prize for Literature, Cultural Relations Platform, and Creative Europe to put this together. Thank you all for watching and being such a great audience, and I hope you'll be logged back on at 8:30 p.m. for our next session on JLF's Brave New World. And this is Art Matters, Jitish Kalat in conversation with Sarah Suzuki, frequently shifting between the registers of the self, the city street, the nation, and the cosmic horizon. Jitish Kalat's art is a speculative field of inquiry interspersed with the concept of time, sustenance, recursion, and historical recall. In a conversation with the Deputy Director for Curatorial Affairs at the Museum of Modern Art, MoMA, New York, Sarah Suzuki, Kalat takes us on a journey of his creative process and his wide-ranging artistic preoccupations. And meanwhile, as you all are aware, as I just said, COVID-19 has created a devastation across the cultural sector, not just in India, but across the world. I believe Art Matters is an advocacy and fundraising effort which will be broadcast on 4th of October on Teamwork's Facebook and YouTube page, as well as on Book My Show, featuring over 400 artists, including A.R. Rahman, Aditi Mangaldas, Shabana Azmi, Manoj Bajpayee, Javed Ali, Sharmila Tagore, Dr. L. Subramaniam, Selva Ganesh, and Shivamani, Shekhar Rabjiani, and the Shillong Choir, and so many more. So do please block your calendar for this. Meanwhile, see you at 8:30.